Namaste, welcome, namaskaram. My name is George Thomas and I want to welcome you all to TipriTV.com. Today, boy, we have a special guest with us, Sunil Robert, who comes all the way to us from New Jersey. Great to have you here on the show. Listen, you have been around the block. You've gotten into radio, you've done some journalism, you've done some business administration, you've even written a book. It's called I Will Survive: Comeback Stories of a Corporate Warrior. What was the thought and the thinking behind putting this book together?
Thank you, George. Essentially, I Will Survive is an autobiography. And I wrote this at the age of 40. Now, that sounds a bit jarring. You don't write an autobiography when you're 40, more so when 40 is seen as a mid-point of life. But what I had as a story to tell was quite compelling. A very troubled childhood, a very turbulent youth phase, a very meandering sort of a phase where I really tried to find who I am, just to find my own calling, find who I am as an individual, my own struggles with faith. So all these tumultuous times put together made a very attractive story. So whenever I went to India, for example, after my overseas stints, I used to be inundated with requests for young people to come and say, would you please share your story? And because I was in India for a very little time, I would only be able to do justice to a portion of the invitations that I would get. At that point, I realized, what if I found something that would work even when I'm not physically present in India? And that's how the genesis of the book happened. What started off as a response to young people asking me, do share with us, how did you overcome this adversity? The question of how, with all this insane problems that you had to battle as a young person, how did you come through? That is the story of I Will Survive.
As you mentioned, you detailed the challenges that you faced as a young person growing up and the challenges of living in a household that was at times tumultuous, you mentioned. What role did perhaps faith and this experiment with faith have in this whole process?
The answer is, without faith, I wouldn't have survived. I was staring down the barrel of some seriously desperate times. Economic, impoverished conditions. Not knowing where your next meal would come from is quite intimidating to a teenager with a couple of siblings thrown in and a family.
And in fact, your father lost his job, and it was tough, right? It was economically really tough.
It was. And so when you're battling such steep conditions, there are times when you just tend to give up and say, you know what, the problems are too overwhelming for me to battle. And then there were times when I really seriously thought of ending my life. And on the other hand, I moved to the other extreme of saying, why do I have to go through this for no fault of mine? So I became enraged as well. So battling between despair and rage, I was caught in a vortex of complex emotions. And how I battled and I came through with any sanity is because of a turning point, a conversion, and a walk with Christ.
When you talk about these two extremes, where did your father figure in it? Was the focus of your anger and perhaps bitterness toward him?
Indeed. All our problems seem to be stemming from the fact that he was the focal point of all our problems. And as a young person, a teenage mind is not equipped to analyze and threadbare discuss what are the cause and effect of such problems. You just emotionally just enraged. So all my rage was directed against my father, but at the same time, I was trying to cope with this complex cauldron of emotions at home by being rebellious outside in college, by just hanging out in gangs, by getting involved in violence, a whole lot of things that I wouldn't put on my resume. Wow. I ended up doing. But yes, the rage was directed towards my father, and how I dealt with that complex emotion really is a very interesting story.
And is that still part of it because perhaps your father, I mean, did he in your mind not stand up or measure up to a particular view that you had of a father? Sure. Where was it? Sure. Why get so angry at your dad?
Sure. I'm the oldest of 4 siblings. And to watch myself and the other 3 siblings being deprived of basic necessities like clothing, like going to school, a decent school, like having 3 square meals a day. These were basic necessities to any person anywhere around the world. And having experienced some form of luxury in our earlier life, and my dad had a well-paying job at that time, and suddenly being deprived really caused a lot of pain. And so I used to constantly, talk back. And in Indian culture,
that's a
talking
no-no.
back to a parent is
yeah.
like the death of that relationship. But those fits of rage, and then followed by long periods of silence, really caused a lot of fracturing of our relationship. And how we went about restoring it, how peace finally came about is a remarkable story in itself.
And what's your relationship like today with your father?
As the repairing phase unfolded, it was quite awkward at the beginning stages, because you're trying to put behind a lot of bitterness, a lot of negative emotions, because a lot of battles had unfolded in the initial years. So it was quite awkward in the first phase. The second phase is when that awkward phase dissolved into some form of artificial intimacy and cordiality. But really, and then this happened over a period of time, and subsequently I got married, and my wife, Prafula, was really instrumental in bringing the 2 warring factions in the family together, because she said, look, whatever has happened is past, and she really played the peacemaker's role. And then because she came on board and she was facilitating a whole lot of relationship dynamics without either of us losing face. And you know how in Indian culture, it's all about holding on to your face, your ego position without losing. And so we had to manage this whole complex dynamic. But towards the end, the relationship, because it was facilitated by a lot of forgiveness, became beautiful. And that's the power of forgiveness. I could have always lived my life in righteous indignation and say, he did it and we suffered, therefore we banish him from our lives. And I could have held that bitterness. But that was eroding my soul. That bitterness was eating away a part of me and not letting me be the full person that God called me to be. So only when I let go, which was not instantaneous, it was a gradual process. But as the negative emotions melted away, healing came in, and that relationship became beautiful towards the end. And I lost him a few years ago. But towards the end, he was as proud of me as a son, as a dad could ever be. And later, as I matured, I discovered that even though he may not have financially provided us a lot of things, he influenced us in some areas that today still contribute to his legacy in our lives. For example, I loved writing, I loved speaking, and that love for the language was inculcated by my father, who himself was not a very literate man. So if he imparted to me such a lovely gift of literature, a gift of knowledge, a gift of language, he gave me more than riches. So I started discovering what a contribution he made much later.